begin as people continue to trickle in, and then hopefully I can let some folks in from the waiting list so that everyone gets a chance to see the presentation tonight. So welcome everyone who is here so far. My name is Sarah McDonough. I'm the programs manager here at the Lexington Historical Society, and we are so happy that you are here joining us tonight for our lecture about the use of radar in World War II. This is part of a larger series of lectures that the Lexington Historical Society is hosting in conjunction with the town-wide celebration of Lexington Remembers World War II, which is happening throughout the year, even if virtually. But before we get into the meat of what this larger celebration entails and what is happening tonight, I would just like to give a couple of brief housekeeping rules as we're heading forward into our presentation. If you hover your mouse around your screen, you'll notice that Zoom, the application that we're using, has several different options for you to interact with us, the panelists tonight, including an option that should be somewhere on your screen for questions and answers. So it will say Q&A with a little speech bubble. If at any point during the presentation you have a question for our speaker, that is the best place to leave any questions that you might have or any comments so that we can address them at the end. I will be passing on all of that information to Eli at the end of the presentation so that he can answer all of your queries. There is also a chat function down there which has the single little speech bubble. Do feel free to use that as well if you have any stories to share, but we would ask that if you have any questions specifically for our speaker, that you not put them there just because they can get lost in the larger conversation. All right, so we do have quite a few people who are in the presentation already, but the number is starting to level out. So I am going to bow out for a minute and allow some of our folks from the waiting list to come in. And in the meantime, I would like to introduce our first speaker, who is the mastermind behind the Lexington Remembers World War II celebration. He originally conceived something similar a couple of years ago as we celebrated the end of World War I. So George Gamoda, who is one of our lovely board members and the figurehead in all of this, would love to tell you a bit more about what his committee is planning for the rest of the year and for our presentation tonight. George, take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure for me to be here tonight. My name is George Gamoda, as Sarah said, and I'm the chair of Lexington Remembers World War II Committee, whose mission is to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. For a small town of some 6,000 people in the 1940s, Lexington sent over 1,460 men and women overseas to find the aggressors and help retain freedom for people around the world. 55 of our fellow Lexingtonians made the utmost sacrifice and did not return home. The committee has been collecting information on those they served and has a database detailing their lives. Along with the database, we are developing an electronic photo album that has images of those that served and their histories. We encourage all who have additional information on World War II veterans to provide it to us so we can share it with others. Finally, I would like to encourage you to view our collection of oral histories of men and women who lived through the war, overseas and on the home front. All of these are vivid stories and are available on our website, Lex Media on Demand, as well as YouTube. Today's lecture is the second in the series we plan to have dealing with World War II. It is a pleasure for me to have Eli Brookner here tonight. His talk tonight will deal with one of the great technological achievements we had to win the war, radar. Let me now introduce Linda Dixon to our virtual podium, who will introduce a special guest tonight. Linda?
Thank you, George. Good evening, everyone. We are thrilled to have a full house to hear Dr. Eli Brookner tell the story of how radar helped to win World War II. As you will learn, Raytheon Technologies, at the time, a new company, a young company with a promising future, is really the star of the story. And we are honored to have with us a Raytheon senior executive to accept our appreciation and our acclaim for their contributions. Dr. Ellen Ferraro is Senior Director of Supplier Assurance. This is quite a title. Senior Director of Supplier Assurance for Raytheon Intelligence and Space. She has held senior leadership positions in several divisions of Raytheon, including Space and Airborne Systems, Advanced Technologies, and Integrated Defense Systems. Dr. Ferraro has been studying radar since her graduate days at UMass Amherst, where she earned her PhD. Her research included the development of an airborne radar altimeter for studying the Greenland ice sheet. She's an active member of several professional organizations. She has received several major awards, including Women to Watch in 2006, the Distinguished New Engineer Award, and 2007 Emerging Leaders Award. And she's known our speaker, Eli Brookner, ever since she came to work at Raytheon. Now, she won't say this, but Eli tells me that her PhD advisor considers her the best student he ever had. So there's Ellen looking modest. Now, this is just something really nice. Ellen's 99-year-old father, Neil Martin, a World War II Army veteran who served in the European theater, is with us tonight. He's watching the program. Welcome, Neil. We're so happy you're here. Your daughter is so proud of you. So with that, please welcome Ellen Ferrara, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you very much, Linda, and thank you for this great opportunity to be part of the Lexington Historical Society's presentation on the contributions of radar to winning World War II. This particular topic and presenter are both very special to me. World War II as a topic is special because, as Linda mentioned, my father is a World War II veteran. Even at the age of 99, he can still recall many of the events of World War II in a vivid and impressive fashion. I feel very fortunate to have him in my life and with us here this evening. And of course, the presenter is very special to me as well. Dr. Eli Brookner has not only been a dear colleague, a mentor, and a friend, but he is also the reason that I came to work at Raytheon 26 years ago, almost to the day. We met at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, right on campus. Eli came out to give one of his talks. Yes, it was on radars. I was a graduate student trying desperately to finish my dissertation, which happened to also be on radars. So I was enthralled by his presentation, not only for the technical content, but also for his incredible photography from all around the world. And yes, of course, the slide with Snoopy as the Red Baron with his radar. I will never forget that. When Eli finished his talk, I eagerly and nervously ran down to the stage, and he was in kind of the classic lecture hall that you have at a university where he was down and all the attendees were up above him. So I ran down the stairs and I waited. Went up to him and started showing him my research. I'd actually brought slides with me. And I started talking about the radar game. We really got into this great technical conversation. He listened, asked questions. And at the end of our chat, he said, "You should come work for Raytheon." And well, the rest is history. I do have one more story to share. Eli and I worked together on many different technical topics, but we also worked on IEEE conference committees together for many, many years. One particular year, we were serving on the 2007 IEEE Radar Conference, which was being held right here in Boston that year. I have two daughters, but at the time they were 9 years old and 7 years old, so fairly young. And it turns out my husband is also an engineer, and he also works for Raytheon. And he was also part of the IEEE conference. He was a plenary speaker. I was the plenary session chair, and Eli was the technical chair. So just one day before the conference is about to be held, I realized that the next day, which was normally a school day, it was a Tuesday, that my daughters didn't have school, that it was a teacher training day, and I had missed this on the schedule. I panicked. I didn't have a backup plan for daycare or anything. Both Paul and I were supposed to be at the conference. So I went into Eli and I said, "I'm sorry, Eli, I made a mistake. Either Paul or I, we can't both be at the conference at the same time. One of us is going to have to stay home, and we'll figure out a plan. We'll make it work." And Eli thought about it for a minute and he said, "Why don't you bring him to the conference?" And so we did. And Eli said, "I will watch them when you and Paul are up on the stage." And so I have this great picture of a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old sitting amongst 500 IEEE conference attendees in the audience, watching their parents both up on stage. And it is a very fond memory. So Eli's friendship and mentorship has had a tremendous impact on me over the years. So with that, I want to introduce Eli. Dr. Eli Brookner received his BS in electrical engineering from the City College of New York and his master's and doctorate degree from Columbia University. He worked on ground, sea, air, and space radars at Raytheon from 1962 to 2014. Prior to that, he worked at Columbia University, Nicollet, and Rome Air Force Labs. He was the recipient of the IEEE 2006 Dennis Pickard Medal for Radar, the IEEE 2003 Warren White Award, the 1966 Journal of Franklin Institute Premium Best Paper Award, and my personal favorite, the 1998 Best Applications Paper IEEE Wheeler Prize. And my favorite because I got to be the co-author with him. And the 2017 IEEE AESS Outstanding Organizational Leadership Award, as well as the RCA Armstrong Award. I could go on and on. Eli he's a fellow of the IEEE, of the IAAA. He's written 4 very popular books on radar, arrays, tracking. He's given his course over 10,000 times in 25 countries, over 230 talks, correspondences, and he has more than 10 patents. So now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, my mentor, and my friend, Dr. Eli Brookner.
Thank you, Ellen. I really appreciate the story about your 2 daughters attending the conference. I do remember very well, and very fond memories. I showed a Snoopy slide, and the younger daughter stood up and pointed to you and said, "Ah, she was enjoying the talk." That was
Absolutely.
And it's an honor to have you introduce me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, my title is Contributions of Radar to Winning World War II. As you know, it's sponsored by the Historical Society of Lexington as part of the celebration of the winning of the World War II, the 75th anniversary. My contact information, anybody want to contact me and get my papers? So you see what I look like? Now, this view graph is a very important view graph. On the left is you before the talk, all haggard and distraught. On the right is you, hopefully after the talk, fat with knowledge and a little humor. I give such talks to Russia, France, Italy, Germany, China,
China again, big country. And here I am, traveling around the world, giving my talk. Now, we radar engineers are very proud of inventing radar and developing radar. But you know, bats have been using radar for millions of years. They use it in the caves to see in the dark, to capture insects. They transmit a pulse of sound as it's traveling through the air. It hits the insect and comes back to the bat. And they can tell the range to the insect from the time it takes to go out and back. And they have two ears that allow them to tell the direction in which the insect is at, so as to capture the insect for its meal. Now, sound that we hear goes from 20 cycles per second to 20,000 cycles per second, typically. The bats, it's typically 20,000 and above that they use. And the sound travels as waves, as shown here, ocean wave, it's windblown here. And here's Fledermaus riding a wave. And here's me riding a wave. Now light travels as waves also. Instead of acoustic waves, it's electric wave. Light is electric wave. And their frequency is much higher than the acoustic waves. For blue light, it's 600 million cycles per second. For red light, it is 460 million cycles per second. Much higher than the acoustic, which are 20 to 20,000 cycles per second. Now, radar is light, just like the visible light, except we can see it, and it works at a lower frequency. For example, a typical frequency would be 1 billion cycles per second. Other invisible light is X-rays, ultraviolet and infrared, and gravity waves. Here I have a flashlight. You have the bulb, which generates the light, and you have a reflector. The reflector causes the light from the bulb to form a collimated beam. I'll call it a pencil beam. Radar works exactly the same way. We have a bulb, which is actually a horn. And out of this horn is the invisible light, like 1 billion cycles per second. And it hits the reflector to form a collimated beam, just like in a flashlight. And I call it a pencil beam. To generate light, we use a flash bulb. And for radar, we have a bulb also. And some of these bulbs are big. This one's 10 feet tall. You put in 100 watts on the bottom, and on the top, out comes 1,000,000 watts. Now, MIT has a radar like this, using a dish. It's used for identifying strange objects in space. It does it by taking a picture, a radar picture of the satellite. On the left, we see the satellite. In the middle, we see what used to be the images this radar used to be able to achieve. It was very poor quality. On the right is the recent version of the radar. It's been upgraded so it can see very fine pictures, 1-inch resolution of satellites in low orbit, like 1,000 miles away. They are still working on improving the radar further so it can take such pictures for satellites at synchronous altitude 25,000 miles away with 1-inch resolution. Amazing, amazing. Radars can see spiders, moths, monkey skulls, not the same monkey. And the advantage of radar, it can see at night, it can see in the fog, it can see in the rain, it can see through clouds, it can see targets, it can see inside buildings. Now the MIT radar I showed has a pencil beam. To do search, you really want a fat beam to reduce the search time. And typically in radar, they widen the beam in elevation and maintain a narrow width and azimuth. And to look around 360, they rotate the antenna so you can see everything around you. They call this type of beam fan beam. It looks like a fan. In my travels, I came across a very advanced modern fan beam radar in South Korea. Oh, I forgot I have this view graph. It shows an ancient fan beam radar, 1 horsepower. Now I show you the one I saw in South Korea at the Polk House. A single fan beam radar. And they have an upgraded version of this that has 2 fan beams. So in 1 rotation, you get 2 looks at the target. And then they have the ultimate radar, which has many fan beams and doesn't have to rotate. Now the British had radar at the beginning of World War II, which was about 1940 for them. They had it on their east coast to protect themselves against attacks from the German aircraft. It served them well. They had fewer aircraft, but because of the radar, were able to shoot down more airplanes than the British were able to shoot down of the British, even though they were outnumbered. It was the advantage of having the radar. Called a chain home radar. They had very tall towers, 300 feet high on the left here, was used for the antennas. The radars worked at a very low frequency. Because it worked at a very low frequency, like 20 million cycles per second, it needed a big antenna, hence the 300-foot towers. And Sir Watson Watt, shown here pictured, is the man behind this radar. Now the US also had radars, 100 when they entered World War II. These radars operated at a higher frequency, hence they had a smaller antenna as shown here, roughly about 10 feet. One of these radars detected the attack on Pearl Harbor. Now Raytheon Sub-Sig Division in 1930 had a complete working radar, and we're very proud of it, and showed the Navy. The Navy said thank you and told them to tell nobody about it and make it secret. So much for inspiring people to work hard and creative. Yeah. The thing was that the old radars that we used at the beginning of World War II used old-fashioned vacuum tubes, 1 inch by 1 inch by 2 inches. And these tubes could not supply high power, like kilowatts of power that we needed for the radar, at high frequencies, so you can have small antennas so you can put the radar on airplanes and ships, airplanes and small ships. Along came the British with a breakthrough, the cavity magnetron invention. This invention allowed them to operate at high frequency with kilowatts of power, and as a result, to put radars on airplanes and ships. There was one problem, though. The problem was that these tubes were very hard to manufacture. You started with a solid hunk of copper and had to mill out with high precision the slots and cavities as shown. The British didn't have the industry capability to manufacture these tubes in large quantities for their radars. So they moved to the US to help the manufacture of these radars. They had a committee they put together called the Tizard Committee that came to the US in 1940. We weren't at war at the time, but the British were. They showed the tube, which was in a box, top secret, that they were buying, and showed it to Vannevar Bush, who was at the time President Roosevelt's science advisor. He was in charge of all research, Vannevar Bush was, in wartime war efforts for radar and other sensors and weapons. He told the British to show the magnetron to 3 big electronic companies in the US, GE, Westinghouse, and Sylvania. And they went around to those 3 companies, and they all didn't offer a solution for manufacturing the tube at high speed. As a result, Vannevar Bush suggested to go to this little unknown company in Boston, Raytheon. At Raytheon, they went there. At Raytheon was Percy Spencer on the left. Now he's interesting. He only had a few years of elementary school education, a self-taught man, never graduated high school or college. And the head of the company was Lawrence Marshall, who graduated from Tufts. It was the CEO of the company. They explained to Spencer the magnetron, and he said to them, "I'd like to borrow the tube over the weekend to study it." It was Friday. They said, "No way, this is our top secret. You can't have it for the weekend." He says, "Then I cannot help you." And they get in and take it for the week. It's the right decision. Came back one day and have advances, improvements in magnetron. Eventually came up for a technique for manufacturing the magnetrons at high speed and low cost. The idea was to start with sheets of copper rather than a solid hunk of copper and stamp out the slots and cavities and then bond the sheets together. Now the government, though, didn't think this would work. The 3 big companies that they visited didn't think this would work and told the government that. But Marshall had faith in Spencer. He believed in him, even though he had no education except self-trained. And to prove that what he was recommending would work. And it did work. What happened is they got the production from 0.4 per day using milling up to 2,600 per day using the stamping of sheets of copper. An increase in the speed of over 1,000. As a result, Raytheon provided 85% of all the Allied magnetrons needed in World War II. Now, this man who had no education also invented the microwave oven. It uses a magnetron for cooking. Raytheon bought a manor, which manufactures utensils for the kitchen, and was selling the microwave oven. I, working at Raytheon, bought one of the microwave ovens with a 20% discount back in the late 60s. That microwave oven worked until last year. It finally broke down after 50 years of operation. A very reliable piece of equipment. Raytheon did get contracts for radar as well. The development of magnetron radars for ships, initially for large ships and medium-sized ships. And Gross on the left was the program manager, who I knew, and Bill Hall, who I knew and Ellen knew when he wrote a paper with us, was the technical director for this radar. They built over 4,000 of these radars and eventually modified some of them for airplanes. They needed, though, a radar that would fit on very small ships and operated in high wind, big waves, that would cause the radar to wobble and make for difficult to display on a scope. Fritz Gross solved this problem, and as a result, this led to a different series of radars. The previous one was the SG. The new one was the SO, which would fit on PT boats as well as other small ships. Here's a small boat. And here's a PT boat. And standing on the left on the PT boat is a man who was President Kennedy. He was in command of one of the PT boats, and I thought it might be him. But I learned that he didn't have such a radar in his boat. Over 6,500 of these radars, small ships, manufactured by Raytheon. And by the end of the war, every warship and every non-warship, commercial ship, had one of these two radars, either the SG or the SO, manufactured by Raytheon. The main effort in the development of radars for the war effort was done at MIT locally here in Cambridge, at the MIT Radiation Lab. At the peak, this lab employed over 4,000 people, scientists. Some of them the brightest in the country. 9 of the people who worked there during the war effort got Nobel Prizes. 9. One of them got it while he was working at MIT for work he did before he got there. That was Isidore Rabi, shown in the center here. He was the chief scientist initially for the Rad Lab. On the right is Vannevar Bush, who oversaw the work being done at the lab. He also initiated the work on the atomic bomb. He actually contributed a lot to the US development in science, in technology science. And he realized the importance of science in our economics, the growth of the country in economics, and doing well in economically. At MIT, they designed over 100 different radars, 50 of which went into production. Here's the building at MIT where the work was done. This is a famous Building 20, a temporary wooden building they finally tore down a few years, replaced by a very modern building shown here. Here it is. And here is one of the radars developed by the MIT Rad Lab group. It's one of their most successful radars. And the fellow in the center there was the lead man, Ivan Getty. Over 1,500 of these radars were produced. It was used to aim the artillery to shoot down enemy missiles and aircraft with high accuracy. Ivan, actually a bright young man, he got his bachelor's at MIT under a Edison scholarship and his PhD on a Rhodes scholarship. And he worked at Raytheon after the war as head of engineering. He was a vice president, and then became president at Aerospace, where he led the work for implementing and deploying the GPS system. And so he gets credit for the GPS system. Quite a feather in his cap. Here we show the SCR 584 on the left. On the right is the artillery. And Applied Physics Lab, APL, was involved in the improvement of the kill capability of the artillery. I'll go into that later. And Bell Labs, BTL, Bell Telephone Laboratory, was involved also. They provided the computer for the radar that would track the enemy targets and predict where to be in the future so as to provide a better kill probability when they use the artillery. Here shows the artillery. It was used to shoot down buzz bombs. These are unmanned planes that the Germans launched, called V-1s also. And the radar was very effective together with the artillery in shooting down these bombs that were launched towards London. Here's a picture of one of these bombs. It's an unmanned airplane, jet propelled. At one point, 104 of these missiles were launched on one day. It was before the launch site was to be captured by the Allies. They decided to shoot off all their missiles at once. Just one second. Sorry about that. I'm not used to this setup here. On that day, they launched all their missiles, 104 of them at London. Only 4 actually hit London. And a major reason was the radar was able to direct the artillery so as to knock down 65% of those missiles. Here's the, it was just as successful in shooting down their German fighters. As a last-ditch effort, Hitler launched 800 aircraft in the battle in Europe, and the radar was credited with downing over 500 of those aircraft, 60%, over 60%. Another threat was the U-boats, the German U-boats. Britain is an island and relied on ships for its food and equipment. The Germans figured they could provide a blockade that would prevent the ships from providing the food and equipment, and therefore starve out the British and defeat them. And they were going to do it with the submarines. And they almost did. The submarines were really devastating. They wreaked havoc on the shipping. It was called the Battle of the Atlantic, the battle between having the ships arrive at Britain and the German desire and effort to sink those ships. The Battle of the Atlantic. In 2 months, in 43, March and April, the U-boats sank 121 Allied ships. During one of those months, there was an Allied convoy of 100 ships that the Germans attacked with 41 U-boats. And at the end of the battle, the Allies lost 22 ships out of the 100, and the Germans only lost 1 U-boat. It was a low point in the war. At this point, many of the Allied people didn't think we could win the war. But things turned around. Well, before I discuss that, another thing they were looking at to defeat the U-boats was to use B-17s loaded with TNT and fly these B-17s as bombs into the pens where the U-boats were stationed. The idea was to have the pilot fly the B-17 and then parachute out to safety. After parachuting out, the SCR radar would track it and guide the aircraft remotely to the pen. Now, Joseph Kennedy Jr., who was the older brother of Jack Kennedy, who became president, was one of the pilots who flew one of those B-17s. He was being groomed to be president. Unfortunate for him, in the plane he was flying, the B-17, the TNT went off accidentally before he could parachute. He parachuted out and died that way. What turned the tide, though, was the deployment of the magnetron radars on ships, the Allied ships, and the Allied aircraft. In the month of May of 43, was a turning point. With the aid of these magnetron radars, the Allies sank 41 U-boats and lost only 30 merchant ships. The Germans at this point decided that the blockade was too expensive for them, losing so many boats, 41 ships in 1 month. That included 2,000 sailors on these ships. And they abandoned the blockade of Britain in the Battle of the Atlantic. Because the Allies won the Atlantic, not a single US soldier was lost in going over the Atlantic for the Normandy invasion. Not a single sailor. Amazing. During World War II, 700 German U-boats were sank, destroyed. And 30,000 submarine sailors died out of 40,000. 3/4 of their men died, the U-boat men. The losses for the Allies were not small either. It was very costly for both. The Allied naval losses were 3,500 merchant ships in World War II, 175 warships, and greater than 72,000 Allied naval men. Quite a tragedy. Another technology that helped in winning the Battle of the Atlantic was the use of listening receivers by the Allies. They would listen to the communications from the submarines and ships of the Germans to their commanders. And by doing that, they could locate the ships and U-boats. With one receiver, you can tell the angle at which the ship is at, or U-boat. And with 2 receivers, you could tell exactly where he was in range and angle. They also listened to their radar, and the Germans had listening receivers too. It turns out that their listening receivers leaked microwave signals, which the Allies could detect and as a result locate where they were. Now, another radar that was developed by the Rad Lab, MIT, is the blind landing radar. Now, what is the blind landing radar? This is a radar that allows you to land an aircraft when you can't see where the runway is. It's blind landing. The radar guides you down. It was and the fellow headed up that effort is Luis Alvarez on the left there. He eventually got a Nobel Prize years later after he left the lab. He's also the one who came up with the theory for the death of the dinosaurs from a meteorite. On the right, I show another person, Charles Fowler. Charles worked for Alvarez on this landing radar during World War II. I got to know Charles when he was at Raytheon as a VP, and also as a VP, a vice president, at MITRE. He also became head of the science board, reporting to the Secretary of Defense. I served on one of his committees, an important one, and I was impressed with the way he ran that committee. Very, very good. Here are the bad guys, Hitler and Mussolini. And here are the good guys, Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin. Now, radar was also important in the battle in the Pacific. Here's one example. A submarine, Allied submarine, spotted a Japanese convoy of 12 ships off the coast of the Philippines. They attacked. It was zero visibility. At the end of the battle, which lasted for many hours, the U.S. sub sunk 5 of the ships in the convoy and damaged 2. This would have not been possible without the radars and sonar on the submarine. What is sonar? Sonar is radar using sound like bats do. It's not new. It was used in World War I to listen to enemy aircraft. With 2 receivers, you can get the angle of the target. It's a passive sonar. It didn't have a transmitter. They call it passive, just listening. Here's another one from World War II. These are actual radars, sonar radars. Here's one that gives you as and L, as only, and an array of ones to give you as and L. Sonar also was used in torpedoes, used by the Allies. Dropped from an airplane. In the nose of the torpedo was a sonar, a listening receiver. It would listen to the engines of the ships, enemy ships and U-boats, and home in on them. It was very effective, and it was a game changer for World War II. Now we come to another technology that was instrumental in winning the war, and that is the proximity fuze. What is the proximity fuze? Well, it's top secret during the war. It's a radar. It's a miniature radar. And it fits on the top of artillery shells, big and small. And in my class I had, lecture series, I had a man who worked on these, and he had one in the hand grenade he showed. Very impressive. They were shot off by artillery, and the radars in these artillery shells had to withstand 20,000 G. So 1 pound would become 20,000 pounds. It's incredible that they were able to achieve what they did. That is to have these radars survive the shooting through these artillery guns and withstanding 20,000 G with vacuum tubes. Let me explain why it's so effective. On the right is an aircraft. The shooting missile that's going to the right, and you see the missile with the fuse on it, the proximity fuse. Without the fuse, the missile would have to hit the airplane, which is shown at the far right, a little far left. But it doesn't, when it has the fuse, it doesn't have to hit the target. As long as it's close enough, it can explode its explosive and destroy the target. And that's what happens when you have a proximity fuse. The radar tells you that you're close enough, and then you allow it to set off the explosive and thereby destroy the target. You have a much bigger kill radius for your missile now. And as a result, this was a major contributor to winning the war. It was also very effective against the enemy army and equipment. Here we show an artillery shell landing on the ground without the fuse. It would dig a hole and the shrapnel would go up in a vertical small angle. And a fellow in the trench on the left there would not be affected. And even if he was out of the trench, he would not be damaged, harmed. What you want is to have the shell go off above the ground, and thereby the fellow in the trench would be in trouble, and all the men on the field, for many hundreds of yards away, would be in danger from the shrapnel, as well as the equipment. It was in the Battle of the Bulge and that the proximity fuse won the Battle of the Bulge for the Allies. A very strong statement for the effectiveness of this technology. Not only was it effective for the enemy troops against them, but also for the kamikaze pilots. You needed to go off the fifth as a shell to knock down a kamikaze pilot when you use the proximity fuse. Here's a kamikaze pilot coming down. Here's a block diagram of the radar with its tubes. In this case, 4 tubes. Some of them had 5 tubes. It's really incredible that people felt that this could be solved, that you could have a radar with tubes survive 20,000 G. And they did, and it worked. And one of the suppliers of those tubes was Raytheon, right here in Waltham. We manufactured the miniature tubes. And Krim here on the right is holding one of them, an MIT graduate. Raytheon was intending to use them for hearing aids, but when the war effort came, they were being used for the proximity fuse. Now, what led us to develop a miniature tube like that? Well, we go back to our friend Percy Spencer again. The fellow had very little education. His son had a toy airplane he was flying around. And he said to his father, "Can you build me a radio receiver so I can have control over my airplane?" And his father said, "Oh, okay." And he made him miniature tubes. And as a result, Raytheon got into the market for manufacturing miniature tubes for hearing aids and eventually for the proximity fuse. A man without much of an education. Really amazing. He eventually got an honorary PhD from the University of Massachusetts. Well deserved. The work on the proximity fuse was carried out at the Applied Physics Lab, which is overseen by Johns Hopkins University. Other contributors were the Tizard Committee I mentioned before. They had drawings of a proximity fuse that they brought over with the magnetron. And there was a professor at Carnegie Institute who was working on the proximity fuse way back when Vannevar Bush was president of Carnegie Tech. He oversaw this fuse work at the time. This proximity fuse involved miniaturization of electronics never before accomplished, which was able to withstand 20,000 G of forces. Really incredible. Now in 1940, there were no fuses, no proximity fuses. By 1945, the US had produced 22 million of them, with a total of 140 billion rugged miniaturized tubes being manufactured for these fuses, which also have a billion total components. These fuses initially cost $782 and at the end of the war went down to $18 per fuse. Over 1 million people work on the proximity fuse throughout the US at 110 plants in total secrecy without a single breach of security. Quite an accomplishment. Well, I used to work at Raytheon, as you found out. And while I was there, an employee at Raytheon beat Einstein. And when you beat Einstein, you have to brag about it. Now here's the cover of the Microwave Journal. It has a circulation of 45,000 around the world. And on this particular issue, they have on the cover hundreds of famous scientists who worked in microwaves and other areas, including Leonardo da Vinci, Armstrong, Edison, Maxwell, Hertz, Faraday. They also included Bill Gates and Zuckerberg, and Einstein. Einstein's above the J. In the lower left-hand corner, though, is who? It's me. They have a picture of me. Not only that, above the C in microwaves is another picture of me. So I appeared on the cover twice, and Einstein only appeared once. So I beat Einstein, and I beat all those other famous scientists. I also appeared on the cover of the IEEE, Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, dancing. Einstein never appeared on the cover. The woman there lives in Lexington, and her husband is an electrical engineer with a PhD in information theory. And he said to me, and my wife appeared on the cover before me. And here I am dancing with Sarah Palin on Dancing with the Stars. Einstein never did that. Here I am on the back cover of that magazine, a different issue, dancing at a radar conference in Bangalore, India, with Dr. Anna from Poland, a radar expert. It was an impromptu performance. The army band played a waltz. I danced. I also appeared 3 times on the Chronicle TV program in Boston. Einstein never appeared even once. Now, radar has other uses than the ones I mentioned. It can locate enemy troops and their equipment to prevent collision between aircraft and ships, provide navigation for bombing missions, can locate launch points of artillery, enemy artillery, and can do target identification so you don't have destruction of your own equipment. Now, everybody tries to get credit for winning the war, I found. Applied physics, they claim that the proximity fuse is second only to the atomic bomb. MIT has another way of claiming it. They say that the atomic bomb ended the war, but radar won the war. Now, I wouldn't argue, both get credit, and both use radar, so radar wins both times. And then you have to give credit to sonar. Of course, sonar was radar too, so radar replaces a major contributor. The atomic bomb. Well, you know, radar was used there too. It was used to determine what altitude the fuse would go off for the atomic bomb. It had a radar fuse. The radar in 4 places played a major role. It might have even played a major role in the capturing of the Enigma decoder, which allowed us to break the German code. They got it from a sinking ship, and the radar might have been involved in the attack on the ship. I wasn't able to verify that, but possible. Now, when the war ended, the famous scientists and smart scientists at the Rad Lab were asked to write 28 volumes describing their work. And here's the 28 volumes. I bought many of these over the years. You used to be able to get it from Artec for $100. But now you can get it free of charge on this website that I have down here. I remember when I was working on radar back then, I said to myself, there's nothing new to be learned about radar. Everything has been done and it's described in these 28 volumes. Was I wrong? Radar has made immense advances since then. Gone through 4 generations of radar, which use electronic scanning of the beam. The first generation used vacuum tubes for the transmitters. The second generation used transistors. The third generation used integrated circuits. And the fourth generation used digital beamforming. So you got rid of a lot of the hardware for forming the beam. A visionary at Raytheon who spearheaded the phased array work at, much of the phased array work at Raytheon was Dennis Picard. He eventually became CEO at Raytheon. What's interesting about him, in addition, is when he was hired at Raytheon, he didn't have a degree in electrical engineering. He only had RCA training as a technician for repairing TV sets and radar. He did get a bachelor's at Northeastern, going to night school, being funded by Raytheon, and worked his way up in the company. And as he did that, he brought in bigger and bigger contracts until he became CEO. I wondered what he'd do as CEO. He doubled the size of the company. He bought the Hughes radar capability and the TI radar capability and E-System, and increased the company's capability. He also saved the Patriot program. It's a competing program the Russian missile defense radar. He's given credit for single-handedly saving that program. They were about to cancel it. Now, I'd like to give where I got some of my information, the books I looked at. There's a book called The Invention That Changed the World. I found it nice that it was written by a person who's not a radar engineer. It gives it more credibility. I had him give a lecture at Raytheon, and he gave me a free copy autograph. Another good book is The Creative Ordeal about Raytheon. Excellent book. And this tabletop book, two authors. The second one, Robert Edwards. He's a veteran from World War II. He was in the Navy for a couple of years before the end of the war. And he's probably listening in. He told me he's going to register. When he left the Navy, he was deciding where to go work. He says, I'm going to go work for that company, Raytheon, that made those reliable radars that we used on the ships. He was a Navy man. And he went to Raytheon and retired. He told me the Raytheon radars were very reliable. When all the other equipment failed, Raytheon radars still work. Here's another reference I recommend. It's an excellent talk I recommend that was sponsored by the Historical Society, which is sponsoring this talk, by Max Mulholland. He was a former officer of the Navy, and he goes in great detail into the Battle of the Atlantic and the May, which they call Black May, when the war was turned around. The fight magnetrons did a job on their U-boats. If you want to learn about radar, I recommend my book. Also, my paper that I published for the Scientific American, a cover story on how phased arrays work in 8 languages, and they sell over 600,000 copies. I also recommend a chapter in an arms control conference that wound up as a book that was held at MIT, and Gary Wiesner wrote the preface. Here's another book that was a conference on arms control that I was involved in, that I wrote a chapter to. And here's some references that I recommend. And here are people who helped me. I have to give credit to them. And here's me going around the world fixing radar. I tell it to take 2 transistors and call me in the morning. And I owe this drawing to Katerina, who worked at Raytheon and came up with these ideas and drawings on his own. Now, hopefully, you're on the right now, smiling with knowledge. And that's the end, and we're ready for questions.
Thank you so much, Eli. That was absolutely wonderful. And it seems that we do have a few questions that have already started to come in. If anyone else has anything that you would like to ask, please feel free to put it in the Q&A box, which will probably be at the bottom of your screen. We do have quite a few questions that have already come in, so we will try to get to as many as we can, although we might not have time for all of them, but do keep asking if you would like, and we will get things started. I should also probably mention, if anyone does have to leave before our Q&A portion begins, thank you so much for joining us this evening. As you may know, our World War II celebration this year has been partially sponsored by a number of organizations, but we are offering most of our programming on a pay-what-you-will basis if you would like to do so. So I will be dropping a little link to our donation page for the Historical Society at the bottom if anyone is willing to throw us a little money if you did like this presentation. We would really appreciate it. All right. Eli, are you prepared for some questions?
Oh, yes, I'm ready.
Wonderful. All right, we'll get started here. Our first question is, when was Raytheon founded and what products did it produce before World War II?
I believe it was around the 20s or late 30s, early 30s. It was founded by Marshall, who I showed. They were making rectifiers that allowed one to, you know, the radios back then used batteries. And the rectifiers that Raytheon manufactured enabled you to operate the radios from a plug into the wall. You plug into the wall and it would serve in place of a battery for the radio. There were some other things they manufactured, but one was a switch of some sort. But yeah, they grew quite a bit during World War II because of the work they did in figuring out how to manufacture the magnetron at high speed at low cost, and also in the development of that S-band radar, 2 S-band radars that were used on all Allied ships. Well, I should say 85% of the Allied ships. So it was all Allied ships, and they supplied 85% of the magnetrons to all the ships.
Great. All right, so this is actually also involving one of our next presentations as well, about the Manhattan Project. It says that required a huge amount of copper supply. Did it interfere with the magnetron production at Raytheon?
Sorry, say that again.
Sure. Did the huge amount of copper that was needed for the Manhattan Project cause any problems for Raytheon?
I never heard of that being an issue, but I don't really know.
Sure, we have a lot of very specific. By the way, I'll try and be as specific as I can be with the questions as someone who does not speak radar fluently. I know you have a lot of very technical.
Everybody in the audience knows enough to speak up.
All right, we have a few other people. I'll hopefully get everyone who has a question a chance to have at least one answered here. Let's see who else had one. All right, here's an interesting one. So it says side-looking sonar systems seem to be capable of presenting something that looks like a picture of sunken objects. If it hasn't been done yet already, would it be possible to build something comparable with ground penetrating radar that could build a picture of something below the ground?
Well, in radar, they have done it where they get a picture of what's inside a building. As the radar is in a car or a van moving past the building, it generates a high resolution image of what's inside the building. The size of the antenna is determined by the distance over which you process the data. If you process for a travel of 1,000 feet of data, you get in effect a 1,000-foot antenna, which is a high resolution antenna, without having to build a very high resolution antenna. But that's been done. That's been done. Does that answer the question?
I believe so. We have a lot of questions about dancing here. Let's see. All right, here's a different person here. Could you speak to the relationship of Alfred Loomis and Tuxedo Park to the development of radar?
Oh, I appreciate that question. Alfred Loomis is in this picture here. He's the third one on the right, second next to Vannevar Bush. He was an investor in early the 20s, before the crash, and he wisely sold all his stocks before the crash and wound up to be a very wealthy man. And he dedicated his life to advancing science and helping in the war effort. And he was partly instrumental in forming the Rad Lab radiation lab, the MIT radiation lab. It was nice to see a man who got rich and decided to do good with his money that way. And it was Bert Fowler who educated me on Alfred Loomis and his contributions. We did have an important contribution in the effort for advancing radar. He himself tried to do some things. He tried to invent the magnetron. He didn't succeed. He wanted to be an Edison, trial and error type thing. But I have to hand it to him for trying. He had a lab over where he lived in New York, devoted to science.
All right, here's hopefully what will be an easy one. I know we saw a lot of images of offices and workspaces over the course of the presentation, but is there a singular place that you did the work on the magnetrons in the area? A particular town that you're based in at that point?
Well, I didn't understand the question. Could you say it again?
The question was where did Raytheon actually do all the physical work on the magnetrons? Was it in the greater Boston area in a specific town or a specific building?
In the Boston area.
Mm-hmm.
Raytheon came from the Boston area. Marshall was educated at Tufts University, and he set up the company here locally. I believe initially, well, I'm not sure. They had one of their major plants was in Waltham. The tube division was there for quite a while, so that might have been where they did the tube work. I can't guarantee that though. And Bob Edwards worked over at Waltham.
Great. So someone was also interested if you could speak a bit more on how our radar compared with the Germans' radar in terms of size and accuracy.
Appreciate that question too. The Germans had radar, but the German scientists didn't believe you can make radars at high frequency, like we did with the magnetron. And as a result, they didn't have such good radars because you needed a high frequency to better detect ships and submarines and airplanes. And we had that advantage. Not only that, not believing that you could have a radar at those high frequencies, they didn't build receivers to detect such radars. So they lost out on that advantage too. They didn't listen for our radar signals, so we can attack without their detecting us from our radiation. It was a big advantage during the war.
Great. And
Radar, they had big phased arrays actually in some parts of Europe. A lot of countries had radar actually, but you have to give England credit for developing the magnetron, coming up with the invention of the magnetron. That was a big breakthrough. And they really pushed the development of radar, and we did too, with our MIT radiation lab.
it looks like someone else was actually, a lot of people asking about sort of the comparisons. Did Raytheon have a role at all in helping to develop the radar for the Soviet Union as well?
I don't believe so. They independently had their own work. It turns out a lot of countries had their own work. There's about 7 countries, allied countries, that actually had radars on their own. But the major, work is done by the U.S. and Britain.
Great.
Germans had radar, but they didn't have the high frequency radar, which was a disadvantage for them. Fortunate for us.
All right, we're at about 8:30 now, so I think I will ask a couple of questions. We have a lot of questions. Perhaps, Eli, are you available to answer any questions after the program, perhaps by email?
Absolutely.
So I can't recall if you had your information on that last slide, but if so, we can definitely put that up at the end.
It was that third slide. The third slide has my...
Yeah. But in the meantime, I will get to probably the most anticipated questions here. One of which being, if you are willing to prophesy a little bit, what will be the next advancement in radar, do you think?
Well, there is the use of radars in cars. Eventually, all cars will have radar. They're getting lower in price, and they're key in helping to avoid accidents. The first car I was in that had radar was in China. The fellow had a Chinese automobile with 5 radars. In 2022, the U.S. requires that all new cars purchased have automatic braking. In order to have automatic braking, that means that all new cars from 2022 on will have to have radar, because radar is used for automatic braking. Now, there also makes big advantage for the military. Raytheon is working on a radar that goes on the future ships. That extends their tradition of World War II, where we had all the ships having our radars. This is our air missile radar. That has digital beamforming in it. And replace the present tube radars. It's one that used with integrated circuits and transistors for the transmitter. People say that radar will play a major role in self-driving cars as well. is true. They have great advantage as far as operating in all weather. And we also can have radars at optical frequencies called LiDAR. And they are being looked at for automobile, self-driving cars, and collision avoidance. Those are the areas I can think of right now where, let me say, if somebody was interested in where to work in the future, I wouldn't hesitate to say that working in radar should be a very promising field for many of young students. It's a work which is very challenging and involves many disciplines. So if you get bored with one area, you can go work in another area involved with radar. It's a marvelous field to be in. I think it's a promising field for any young engineer right now. There is a radar called MIMO, multiple input, multiple output. It's got a lot of attention, a lot of funding from the government. I found that it's not as promising as the people indicated initially. It does have potential in car radars, though. That's one area it might fruitful. And a lot of work is going on in using it for car radar. I can go on to another question.
Yeah, I think that shows that, you know, radar is definitely something that's all around us, even if we don't realize it, particularly with cars.
Right, yes. It's used for a lot of things, actually. Like you can buy a radar for measuring the speed of a baseball, right? For $80, you can go to a sports store and get a radar for that. Like a speed gun. Actually, you can buy a toy radar for $20. At least it used to be on eBay. I know the secretary at Raytheon bought one for her son. He was an engineer at Tufts and was very happy to have that radar. It has many uses. Radar has many uses.
All right, do you think you have time for one or two more, or should we end with the big one?
Oh, you can have another one, sure.
Okay. Let's see what we haven't answered yet here. This one is lost it there.
Okay.
Fairly simple one. Was radar able to be used for anti-submarine warfare? Did the salt water affect it in any way?
Interesting. Radar was very useful for helping to defeat the German submarines. The German submarines, initially, until the end of the war, they required to surface to recharge their battery. They could only be submerged for 24 hours before they had to recharge. When they were submerged, they could not be detected by radar, classical radar. It needed sonar. Sonar is acoustic and works in the water. Electromagnetic waves don't work in salt water. In fresh water, it works, but the submarines aren't in fresh water. When they surfaced, the magnetron radars were able to detect the submarine, the conning towers. And as a result, the U-boats were vulnerable at night when they tried to recharge their battery. If they went under, they can only go 3 miles per hour for 24 hours, which means they can only go a distance of 72 miles from where they sank, where they went under, where they submerged. That means in order to find them, you only have to search over a 72-mile radius. As a result, they were very vulnerable. It was very easy to find them and destroy them once they came up again, because they couldn't stay under more than 24 hours. So the radar was very successful in defeating the submarine attacks. The radar doesn't work underwater. In other words, the radar doesn't look underwater. The water has salt, and the water is conducting, and electromagnetic waves don't travel in salt water, which is what the ocean is. It does travel in lake water where there's no salt. Radar would work. But the radar would not be able to detect a submarine that's submerged. But sonar would, and sonar was used for that purpose. So to answer the question, radar is used for very effectively for defeating the U-boats because they had a surface to recharge their battery, except to the very end of the war. At the end of the war, they figured out how to have a snorkel that allowed them to run their diesel engines when they're submerged. Otherwise, they had to use the battery when they're submerged. But it was too late. So they got that snorkel too late for helping them in the war, fortunate for us. So again, radar played a major role in helping defeat the Germans in the war effort.
Perfect. You know, this is useful to the point if people were actually receptive to using radar or not. It's been said that the Pearl Harbor attack was detected by radar, but that was ignored. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, that's an interesting story, famous story. We all talk about it. The tragedy. That radar I showed was in Pearl Harbor, and it was operating the day of the attack on Pearl Harbor. And they saw these airplanes coming in towards Pearl Harbor. But it turns out that one of the officers on duty had heard that the American airplanes had gone out on a training run. And he concluded that these must be the US aircraft returning. So he didn't really report it correctly as enemy aircraft coming in. Just a lack of communication and understanding, training. Too bad. It might have saved some lives of ships if they had reported it properly. We radar men are always very unhappy about that story. That wasn't used properly at the time.
We're getting
Not making use of that information. Kind of a sad story.
Yeah, we have one more character that someone is interested in here. Reginald Victor Jones. there anything you'd like to say about him?
What's his name?
Reginald Victor Jones.
I don't know him. Maybe he can tell me a little about him.
All right then. Well, we'll get to the, I think, probably the most anticipated question, I think, of the night. With many of these were from Melinda, and she is curious when she is going to get to ballroom dance with you again.
Oh, you know, that's controlled by the governor. He doesn't allow that. We have to wait to see what happens. You know, as far as yeah, I'm very disappointed. It's a big hobby of mine. I really miss it. Waiting patiently to see that we'd be able to go dancing and meet my fellow dancers.
I hope we get to do that again soon.
I really do. Yeah.
All right, well, we're coming up on 8:45 here, so I think that has covered most of the questions that we've got. Eli, if it's okay with you, I'm going to plop your email address down here in the bottom for anyone
Oh, okay.
who has any follow-ups.
I can send them some of my papers if they want.
Great.
Not the book.
Yeah. So I'll plop that right down in the chat there. And before we sign off, is there anything you would like to impart on us, any words of wisdom to close out?
Well, it's certainly nice that we're celebrating the 75th anniversary. It's educational to see what happened. In some ways, it was a very sad for both sides. So a lot of people, as I showed in one of the slides, the losses that ships, merchant and military and sailors on the Allied side was very large. In the 72,000 men. Hopefully, it will encourage people not to have wars in the future. Seeing what happened in the previous wars. So far, we've been successful. Well, we have a major war like World War II. We've had minor wars, not nice either. It's an honor.
You have to take your talk on the road then.
It's an honor to have given the talk. I appreciate it for the opportunity to partake in this event. Very nice that you're doing it.
It was a pleasure to have you.
Eventually, they'll have the talk available on the website.
Yes, so this is being recorded, and as soon as possible, likely early next week, we'll be putting it on our YouTube page. So if you just search Lexington Historical Society on YouTube, we will pop up.
Oh,
and any of our lectures that we are offering, have offered in the past, will offer in the future, that are recorded always with the speaker's permission, will be available on there, and as well as eventually being available on Lex Media. So if you know of anyone who was not able to make it tonight, please do send them in our direction, and links to all of that will be up on our website, lexingtonhistory.org.
Right, very good. I know quite a few people.
I'm glad we were able to get all of our folks on the waiting list as well.
Right. Very good.
Thank you very much, Eli.
Any other last words from the rest of the panel? We appreciate all of you being here tonight.
And I appreciate the Historical Society of Lexington putting on this series of talks celebrating World War II victory.
Great job. Thank you, Eli.
It could have been that it was really a battle. The Germans were close to winning at that point. They really were very Very strong enemy. Could have gone either way for quite a while.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. And if you're interested in more World War II events, there is quite a lot planned. I'm going to just grab here the official website for the town celebration. If anyone is interested, all of these events will be listed here, as well as on the Lexington Historical Society website on our events page. And this website also includes lots of amazing information, as George mentioned in the beginning, including photo albums of all of our Lexington veterans and oral histories, which has been an absolutely amazing project to watch unfold. So we look forward to seeing you many more times over the course of this commemoration through the end of this year. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Eli. It was very pleasurable to hear your talk. And I learned a lot today, even though I heard part of it 2 years ago. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. This is quite a different talk, actually. Very good.
Thank you all. Good night.